All right. Sorry.
Fun times.
It was at least well timed. We were just starting a question. So I'll go ahead and put it back up on the screen again real quick. Benny24X asking, will there be any new Battlegrounds coming in Legion?
Possibly. We don't currently have any planned for the upcoming patches I talked about at BlizzCon. I think we focused those efforts on PvP brawls and things like Winter Arathi Basin and other twists on some familiar experiences. We definitely want to make more Battlegrounds. It's just a question of finding something that fits in thematically with where the expansion's currently at. This isn't a big Alliance versus Horde moment right now. This is very much centered around the Legion, and it's harder to leverage that into a particular, thematic battleground. But we are actively discussing cool ideas for new ones, and it's just a matter of figuring out where we're going to slot them in terms of future content.
Okay,
we know it's an area that we haven't done as much as we should have.
And we did talk a little bit at BlizzCon about the brawls that are coming, which are some of those are going to be kind of a sort of a remix. Like there's the Arathi Basin, but during the winter Arathi Basin, so visibility is low and everything.
Exactly. And
so
I think
there's some content sort of along those lines.
And I think as we talk about adding new battlegrounds, we're also getting to a point where we have a lot of existing battlegrounds. And as the pool gets larger and larger, I think as we want to continue to grow it, we start to also want to answer questions like whether do we move to a map rotation or a smaller, more focused pool rather than just adding more and more and more and diluting the existing pool so that if you have a favorite map or two, you may only see them once every couple of days when you're queuing. That's other problems for us to work through, basically.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next question, which comes from Daichis, is maybe how I pronounce this. Says, thoughts on legendaries. A couple of them can completely change the feel of the class, while most of them are just way undertuned compared to the best in slot legendaries and don't feel rewarding at all. Any changes of mind? Do you have any secrets to share with us? Perhaps any Cephas's secrets to share with us? Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Too soon.
I had to.
So legendaries, I think this is something we're tackling from a couple of ends. There's definitely not all legendaries are meant to be equal. There's always the reality, no matter what we did, if we just put the legendaries in a vendor, there would always be your first choice. Yeah. There would always be your last choice. And of course, you're not going to be as excited to get your last choice as you would to get your first choice. We are looking at and listening to feedback about the cases where the last choice or last couple of choices often feel entirely not worth using at all. And those are things that we're trying to address with some targeted buffs coming in 7.15. Some of the low-end legendaries are getting buffed. Also, though, at the very high end, there are a couple of nerfs coming as well. Things like the Fire Mage Power Blast Bracers or the Unholy Decay, I believe, Bracers. It's a list of 4 or 5 legendaries that are extreme high-end outliers. And then they make it feel where even getting a legendary that's solid, instead of being exciting, you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but this could have been a 10% throughput increase from that thing, so I feel bad as a result of that. But for the most part, buff the low-end ones, slightly nerf the high-end ones, add a few new exciting ones to the pool. But all of that said, and then separately, stat weighting and the issues we talked about earlier with regard to item level also factor in terms of making them often feel unrewarding. If there's a utility, thing on your neck, let's say talk about Pride as another one of those, kind of much maligned legendaries. Part of the reason why that's much maligned is you get the item, and let's say you have Pawn or something like that installed, and it doesn't have the stats for your spec, and you look at the stats, and it's actually a throughput downgrade to equip the item. And okay, sure, maybe there's this absorb shield that might save your life here and there, but you don't ever feel good about equipping an item that is a throughput downgrade to your main role. So part of what I think the secondary stat improvements in 7.15 will help there. Something else we're doing and actually targeting as a hotfix for this coming Tuesday is to increase the item level of all legendaries across the board by 15. So all existing legendaries would actually be 9/10s. They would exceed the otherwise ceiling on all other items to help reinforce the fact that these, in almost all cases, should be upgrades. Even if the effect on them is situational.
Right.
They should still be the best thing you can hope to wear in that slot, and so you should never be actively upset about and feeling like you got something useless.
Right.
Maybe you wouldn't be as excited as you would if you got the one that was best for you. There's very little that we can do about that other than moving to a fully deterministic system, which we've discussed in the past why that's not, we don't think that's the right path. But if nothing else, it's going to be a great item.
Cool. Yeah, I actually think it's kind of cool how for most of the legendaries, they kind of mix up your playstyle. Using an example of what happened to me recently, I got the legs on my Mistweaver that make Thunder Focus T give you a random extra charge. And previously I'd been running the talent that, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, the one that makes Thunder Focus T affect 2 things, or affect your next 2 spells. But I actually changed it to the one that causes Rising Sun Kick to reset it once I got those legs. And it was kind of cool how getting those legs changed how I, like, that probably would have been my first choice in Legendary, but I got them and it changed up how I play. And that I think is kind of interesting.
Exactly. And I think, the utility is often undervalued. Because it's hard to quantify. It's impossible to quantify in a lot of cases. It's obvious when something is making you win meters, when you can compare yourself to your parse from last week and clearly see how much better you are, or you can look at someone else who has a thing you don't and feel envious. That's obvious. But effects like, whether it's the Absorb Shield on Prydaz, or whether it's the Warlock Pants that make Demonic Gateway instant,
right?
Those aren't necessarily immediately valued, but there are situations where they can save your life or be transformative, especially with changes to Demonic Gateway to make it instant, truly instant, especially when you have those pants in terms of the missile travel time. It can open up strategies for your raid that wouldn't exist if you didn't have a Warlock with those things.
Yeah.
And our hope was that even if you didn't immediately get excited by the utility effect on an item, well, you'd equip the item for the stats, and then discover organically situations in which that effect was maybe more useful than you thought. Maybe you didn't really care about corruption snaring very much until you realized that it was actually super useful on Lethon Shades, on Dragons, or on any number of ads fights where you have scattered ads that you really want to control, and being able to reliably snare all of them was tremendously helpful. Of course, if you get the item and grumble and just put it in your bags because it's not a stat upgrade, you never actually get that moment of discovery. And so that's a very fundamental problem that we need to solve, and we're hoping we will solve in 7.15.
Yeah, and I was kind of joking about Cephas' secret earlier, but
no, you weren't.
I was a little bit joking about Cephas' secret. I actually know several people who have it now in my guild that I run Mythic Pluses with a lot, and we found that it's actually just ridiculously good for Mythic Plus.
I know, it's one of those things that's become a meme. Like, I get it. It doesn't help on our sock. I get it.
Yeah.
If you're running Mythic Keystone Dungeons, or if you're doing a number of other fights, for most specs, it's actually quite good with the frequency with which you can trigger it.
Yeah, it's like half a Bloodlust every 30 to 60 seconds, depending on the cooldown of the ability.
Exactly. If you're shockwaving every pack, every time it's up on trash packs, or you're dropping a Lightning Surge Totem or what have you, that goes a really long way.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to, I guess, more legendary questions. Moving on from the legendary topic to the legendary topic. Question here from Bendak, who asked, will upgrading legendaries affect their equip bonuses or just the stats? And how long will it take an average player to upgrade one? So he's kind of referring to something that I think it was you were talking about at BlizzCon. In a future patch, you'll be able to actually upgrade your legendary.
Yes.
And this is separate from the item level.
Well, it's actually a current patch. I mean, it's the data to allow that to happen is actually in patch 7.1. It's just tied to the Nighthold raid currently. When Nighthold comes out, the ceiling on items will go up from 895, and so we want to make sure that legendaries, if you want them to be that, should be the best items you can equip in a given slot. Once that ceiling goes up, new legendaries that you obtain will drop at that new ceiling, but we want to make sure that your old ones aren't left behind, and you don't feel bad, like, I got the power bracers back in Nightmare days, but they're not worth using. Well, of course, they'll still be worth using, but they theoretically might be not as good as they could have been if you'd gotten them in Nighthold.
I wish I had the 925.
Exactly. This is just a mechanic to make sure that they keep up and stay on top of the remainder of the items. I'm not sure that we've nailed down. Actually, we have, but I don't know that I know off the top of my head exactly what the expected time it will take to upgrade a legendary is. I don't think it's supposed to be a super grindy process. It's just a matter of time investment and doing relative content.
And then it'll only be on the legendaries. Relevant. That'll only be on the legendaries that you already have once Nighthold opens. From what you're saying.
It's new ones that drop will already be the new high.
Okay.
Cap eye level, whether it's like 930 or whatever. Cool. It's just old ones you can keep relevant and up at that top tier.
And this is separate from the 15 item level bump that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
That's happening with next week's. Okay, cool. Question here from Death Tass, who asked, will we be able to equip more legendaries in patch 7.2?
Not currently planned in 7.2. It's likely to come at some point later in the expansion, but we'd actually like... I mean, the cap there is actually in large part designed to limit the discrepancy and the disparity that can result from randomness, to make sure that the super lucky person isn't that much better or more powerful than the less fortunate. And I think what we're going to see as it becomes more common to have a couple or a few legendaries, there'll be such a thing as the situational legendary. You'll have that, corruption snares legendary in your bag that you don't use on some fights, but you do swap in for useful ad fights, for example, and it becomes part of a toolkit that you can draw upon. Now, I think, obviously, if you get to a point where you have 6 or 7 legendaries and you can only equip 2, okay, maybe that's when it'll be a good time to add a third and allow for more combinations, but I don't think we're terribly close to that point just yet.
Okay, cool. Next question here comes from Pat Ford on Twitter, who asked, any plans to add options for the new social thingy? Disable sound notifications, limit to friends, disable for guild members. So this is referring to the quick join feature,
yes,
which had a new alert added to it recently.
Yes, I think? We have a hotfix in the works to disable the sound associated with the toasts popping. So that's that should help there. Totally understand if that is an irritant to some. But the goal with the feature, ultimately, I think we're treating guild members and friends equally here. These are both groups of people that you presumably are interested in playing with, because you've taken an action
if you don't want to play
either
with them,
join their guild or
yeah.
add them to your guild or add them to your friends list. And this is just trying to expose more information to make it easier for friends to play with each other. I think all too often you'd have multiple people in a guild or multiple people on friends lists queuing in parallel for time walking, solo queuing, or queuing in parallel for random heroic of the day or doing random BGs, and not really taking the time to say, because you often just do it. You don't necessarily ask, hey, anyone want to queue with me? But when you push that queue button, you're kind of signing up to play with any random people.
Sure.
If given the chance, wouldn't you rather play with a friend or two versus not? So this just surfaces the activities of your friends in a way that lets people jump in and hopefully spend more time playing with their friends than they otherwise would have.
Okay. Cool. Next question here from Lilith Via, who asked, could you explain if Argus will be just a raid or a whole new continent coupled with a leveling experience?
I can promise it will not be a leveling experience. It's not an expansion, as I said earlier.
You didn't just casually announce the next expansion at the end of a panel?
No, I should have clarified that during the panel, though. No, patch 7.3 is going to take us to Argus. It's, I think, the standard package of outdoor zone quests, instanced content, raid, and other complementary features. But it is the capstone of the story of the Legion expansion. We were attacked. We defend our planet. We drive them back, and we win a temporary peace, but I think we need more than a temporary peace this time. We need to take the fight to them, and that's the only way we're ever truly going to be safe. That is the story of the patch. Like
the 3,000th time that the Legion has invaded Azeroth at this point, it might be nice to at least put a little bit more of a stop to it this time.
Exactly.
Cool. Next question from Armorall, who asked, what has the design team learned from the implementation of all the hidden secrets in Legion that has taken weeks or months for the community to solve? And can we expect even more difficult puzzles in 7.1.5 and 7.2? So we put out a post a couple of weeks ago that was kind of saying, talking about some of the hidden secrets, the hidden artifact appearances particularly, and saying that we've obviously learned a lot from how that's gone.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So we've learned that these types of puzzles and mysteries are fun, and we definitely would like to do more of them. I think Kasumoth probably stands as the first of the expansion and the singularly most successful of all of those in terms of how it was discovered, how it was largely driven by in-game clues, by players noticing the positioning of rocks on something that vaguely seemed like a map of the Broken Isles and overlaying that on the real map to figure out locations to search for. That was a very, very cool experience. The hidden artifact appearances, I think, were more of a mixed bag. We didn't design all of them to be truly hidden in the hidden sense. Obviously, some of them are just on a vendor.
Right. Yeah.
They were more just kind of bonus appearances. And some of them, I think there are definitely some more memorable ones like the Ashbringer or like the Sheep Staff. And then there are others that were more frustrating in their sheer randomness. Though even some of the random ones, I think, some Goblin Glider shenanigans notwithstanding, there was a lot of fun and coolness to outlaw rogue farming groups of, 5 rogues stealthing past dungeon bosses and assassinating their targets repeatedly, trying to get these, trying to get the Thunder Fury appearance. But yeah, so I think we'd like to minimize frustration. We'd like to lessen the extent to which some of these have turned into basically like Sombra style ARGs. The coolness of the Kosamoth mystery was how it played out largely in game, as opposed to some of the hidden artifact appearances that turned into getting macros to check quest completion or flags on your character or other things that were just obscure script commands based on data mining and trying to match those to the mystery hunt. So that's one thing we definitely felt was less successful. I think we definitely would like to do more of this in the future. I don't know that more difficult is necessarily what we're aiming for. I think Kosamoth was plenty difficult. I think it's more about more fun, more organic, and more intuitive. And it's not something we want to overdo either. At the end of the day, the core of the game is the MMORPG that it is. It's not entirely a scavenger hunt or Easter egg game.
Right.
But never being totally sure whether there's a surprise lurking, I think, makes the game feel more exciting, and that's something we want to keep reinforcing.
Cool. And if I'm not mistaken, there's actually still a couple of scattered secrets here and there.
There are a couple of
people
small
haven't
things.
found
Yeah,
out
there's
yet.
nothing Kosamoth scale, but
Right,
there are a couple of small things.
Yeah. So keep looking.
Mm-hmm.
Question here. This is actually very much along the same lines, so we may have already kind of answered this. I'll bring it up anyway.
Sure.
Comes from Nikarn, who said, is there going to be any work done to remove much of the RNG or gating process for hidden artifacts in the future? An example is fishing or slimes for Retribution Paladin or Protection Warrior.
Yes, some. We have some quality of life improvements for a lot of these coming in a future patch. That just it's basically a form of bad luck protection on most of the RNG drops, so that you're not going to. We can guarantee that no one's going to run the Withered scenario for the next year and never get their hidden appearance out of the final chest, for example. Or, we recently changed it so that the world boss drops, the fact that they only come around once every few weeks is enough. They don't also need to be a random drop on top of that. They're guaranteed drops if your appearance or a piece of the appearance comes from a world boss. So changes like those are what we have in the pipeline. We're not completely redesigning any of them, more just making sure that we try to steer away from the frustrating end of the spectrum.
Okay, cool. Moving on, next question comes from Cybok, who asked, at BlizzCon, you stated that Heroic and Mythic dungeons will be upgraded to fit the new raid tier in 7.2. Does that mean that new level 110 characters will not have access to dungeons until being geared up much better? So kind of like if after 7.2 drops and all the dungeons get updated and then I level a new character, do I need to like spam run normals or something for that?
Yes, you should spam run normals, but the missing piece is that we're actually going to bump the item level awarded by normals up to probably 825.
Okay, cool.
So that, and that actually gives normal dungeons more of a place and a purpose. I think in a lot of cases, people ran very few normal mode dungeons. They maybe did a couple and then focused on world quests and other avenues to get up to the item level requirement for Heroic. This time around, I think you'll hit max level, probably in eye level 780 or so. And normal dungeons will be a very, very lucrative way of getting your gear up, and then bolstered by world quests, by new gear options from Broken Shore, in the general vein of catch-up gear like we had in Tanan. That will get you comfortably into the range of being able to queue for the new Heroic and then join groups for the new Mythic dungeons that will get you into proper 7.2 endgame territory.
Okay, cool. Sounds good to me. Next question from Classic Sours, who asked, with Mythic Plus difficulty going up in 7.2, will the Mythic 10 and 15 achievements be made seasonal for what is essentially a new season of Mythic Plus?
Not currently planned to do that. I think it's more, the difficulty going up effectively resets those achievements and keeps them feeling relevant and meaningful. working towards and getting that Mythic 15 and 7.2 will be every bit as much of an achievement as it was to do it
Right.
in this cycle. There may be some new achievements that we add, certainly, and updates to reflect the fact that there are new affixes. There will be some other tweaks made, but in terms of unlocking your artifact appearance, that sort of thing, if you've done a 10, if you've done a 15, you've done a 15.
Cool. Sounds good. Moving on. We're starting to get, we got about 15 minutes left, so try and move through these as quickly as we can. Question here from Gerland, who asked, will there be another pet battle tournament like the Celestial Tournament, or will there be a sort of pet battle arena? Other than new pets and world quests, there seems to be a lack of pet content. I like that last sentence. Other than all this new pet content,
Yes.
there seems to be a lack of pet content.
I mean, yes. So I think pet battles are something that we continue to update. Obviously, they're new trainers. World quests were kind of the main focus, and adding pet battle world quests this time around, along with achievements to go with them, was the focus of 7.0. I threw out the words pet battle dungeon at BlizzCon in response to a similar question in the Q&A, and that's something that we'll talk more about in the future. But it's in the same general vein as things like the Celestial Tournament.
Okay.
We're always looking to continue to update and add new content there because there's a lot of depth to the system. We know there are a ton of players who love collecting, upgrading, and having new challenges with their vast army of pets. It's something we'll keep doing.
Cool. Moving on. Next question from Rafaela, who asked, with the content announced for 7.15 and 7.2, where does Nighthold fit in? Would it be nice to get an approximate timeline of these upcoming releases so we know what's on the horizon?
Okay, so Nighthold is, it's in the game right now. Obviously, it's just locked. We've tested the encounters on beta going back to 7.0. Our current target for Nighthold opening, I think it'll probably be a couple more weeks before we nail down exact dates, but we're thinking mid to late January. That's in line with the sort of 4-month time frame for the lifespan of Emerald Nightmare that we talked about. We understand that once Nighthold comes out, most people will move on from Nightmare to that, and I think that's a good amount of time, especially with the supplement of the 3 bosses in Trial of Valor, to let that raid tier breathe. We wanted to give it more time than we gave Heimal, which we feel like was a little bit rushed. So obviously 7.2 and the Tomb of Sargeras will come after that. I think that's kind of how it will generally play out. One thing to note is it's actually very likely, I would say, it's certain, Tomb of Sargeras will not be open the day 7.2 hits the live servers. Part of the story of 7.2 will be working your way towards and breaching the Tomb of Sargeras. Very similar to how the current Nightfallen storyline is leading up to the attack on the Nighthold. I think part of a steady stream of content and part of pacing out all the pieces of content that we have means often decoupling pieces of content from the patches in which the data technically exists. I think that by the time 7.2 comes out, when it comes out, players will be very eager and very ready for new outdoor spaces, new outdoor quests, a new outdoor zone, as well as a new dungeon. I think it's much less likely that players will feel the urgent need to have a large new raid zone. I think Nighthold will still be very healthy, very active. People will still be progressing through Nighthold at that point, and we don't want to make the same mistake that we've made often in the past of cutting our own content short and rushing players along before they're really ready for it. So, that may lead to, in the long run, more of a staggered pacing of pieces of outdoor content versus raid zones and the like, rather than the monolithic patch structure of the past, where everything got updated at the same time, whether you were ready for it or not.
Yeah, and that's one of the cool things also, looking at it from the other perspective a little bit, about how this pacing is working and the fact that raids aren't necessarily tied directly to a patch. In Legion, like Nighthold, like you said, has been in the game for a while. If 7.2 had to wait until players were ready for Tomb of Sargeras to even release, then
that also wouldn't be good either. And I think this is a lesson learned in some ways from patch 6.2. When Tanan Jungle and Hellfire Citadel came out, I think people, in retrospect, certainly deep into the content drought of 6.2, people would often say, well, you guys released Hellfire Citadel way too soon. And we agree. Certainly in retrospect, if we could go back, knowing how the whole thing was going to play out, Hellfire Citadel definitely could have waited longer. I don't think Tanan Jungle could have waited longer, though, right? At the time that 6.2 came out, players really were in many ways desperate for fresh outdoor content and ways to progress their character outside of the, raids and other things they've been doing and outside of garrisons. So in retrospect, we probably should have said something like Tanan is what it is, but Hellfire Citadel is something you need to breach as part of the storyline, and that would wait a couple of months. So
Cool.
That's occasionally us learning.
Yeah, occasionally.
Sometimes.
Does happen every
Yes.
once in a while. All right, moving on. Next question here from Ulian, who asked, for class-specific mounts, are they all going to have slight differences in appearance based on spec, or is that only going to apply to certain classes?
It only applies to certain classes.
Okay.
I think it's driven by cases where it was there's a very clear thematic connection, or it would have felt inappropriate to not do that. I think ones that immediately come to mind are the priest mount, that owl-like creature that you can fly around on. Well, there's a golden, glowing, holy version that feels completely at odds with the Shadow Priest.
Yeah.
Why would a Shadow Priest in void form be riding this crazy holy creature? Well, they wouldn't. They would have a shadowy alternate version of it. Or the mage floating disc, inspired by the discs in Eye of Eternity, the Malagos raid encounter back in Wrath. The one that you saw in the video was the arcane version that had arcane effects. If you're a frost mage, it'll instead be ringed by frost crystals that leave trails. If you're a fire mage, it'll be balls of flame. That just felt like a thematic consistency.
Nice.
Hunters, all hunters are going to ride the same mount because it feels perfectly appropriate for the hunter class as a whole, because the specs don't diverge in the same ways.
Yeah, that makes sense then. Like it's not like a survival hunter and a beast mastery hunter are particularly less huntery in any particular way. So that makes sense. Question here from Leowin, who asked, what happened to the Kirin Tor dailies? And I know Warcraft devs put out a tweet about this yesterday, I think, but do you want to go into a little more detail of what's going on with that?
We adjusted them to be slightly less common, is all that it boils down to. And I think they're actually not, they just haven't popped, which makes it feel like, we made it drastically less common. We didn't, but that's just the random nature of how it unfolds. They were always meant to be kind of a quirky, different package of side quests when they were up, but we were finding them often popping twice in a given week, and it felt like there were always Kirin Tor dailies on your map all the time, and wanted to strike a better balance between what was designed to be quirky, non-traditional content and the core zone-based, reputation-based world quests. So they're still around. If it turns out that they continue not appearing much, we may need to bump the rates up again. It's the goal was to have them be around on average, maybe twice every 3 weeks, that sort of thing. And obviously that hasn't happened just yet, but we would expect it to.
Okay, cool. And it's worth noting as well, a big part of what makes them fun and interesting is because they are kind of different from everything else. And if you're getting the different thing all the time, is it really actually different anymore?
Exactly. The magic of flight becomes a bit less magical.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Question here from Simple Waves, who says, will we see more improvements on the auction house, say in the form of buy orders or similar?
So, yes, though when is the question. There's no question we are very dissatisfied with our base auction house experience.
It's showing its age a
it
bit.
shouldn't be necessary. If you don't use, I highly recommend going and downloading a mod like Auctionator. It's just a lightweight mod that will make for a better experience. And I hate having to say that, right? You shouldn't need to do that. Add-on should be about customizing your UI, tailoring it to your own personal visual preferences and presentation of information, not about necessary functionality. But yeah, the auction house needs some work. It's an old system that hasn't changed significantly since the beginning of the game. I think the biggest thing that we'd like to move towards is a broader commodity-like treatment of stackable reagents, consumables, crafted items, etc. If someone should be able to list a stack of 200, and I should be able to buy 37 of those 200 if I want to. Yeah. And if the others don't sell, well, then the person will get back gold and the 163 that didn't sell.
Yeah.
Or people can buy the others rather than all of the one stacks that are just a plague. Yeah. Which we agree.
I didn't. I went grocery shopping yesterday. I went to Albertsons. I didn't walk in and be like, I would like to buy a can of beans. And they're like, well, you can't buy one can of beans. All you can buy is the 500 that we have here in the shop. So
yes,
that makes sense. Cool. Let's move on. Next question here from Ziona, who asked, can you look at rewards when you fail to get loot from a world boss? 32 gold for the boss and 35 to 45 gold from the bonus roll seems very unrewarding and discourages a lot of people.
Also, the gold from the world boss itself is just kind of there to make it clear that you got something when killing it.
You
Even
did
if you didn't get an
successfully
item,
loot, but it wasn't.
I think
geared.
we generally view the world quest wrapper as the baseline guaranteed reward, whether that's like 1,000 order resources or 600 or 700 gold. I mean, there's always going to be a pretty high value world quest associated with that. Bugs notwithstanding, we're obviously very much focused on the bug that occasionally makes the world quest not properly trigger when you engage the world boss. Bonus rolls, though, we completely agree. There's actually a technical hurdle right now. The system was designed to want just a pure currency as the fallback when you fail the bonus roll. We'd like to be able to just give you a nice artifact power item as your consolation prize, and that's something we're working towards doing.
Cool. Sounds good. That's actually a suggestion that a lot of people have made as well.
Yeah, those suggestions are completely correct.
Nice.
Would be an improvement.
Next question from Le Dude, who asked, when will more specs like Arcane, Restoration, and Protection be introduced to class trials?
Well, so the class trial itself, the ability, if you own Legion, to make a level 100 character and try it out for a couple of hours before you decide whether or not you want to boost it, that can work with any specs. Even though when you make a mage, let's say there might be one particular spec that you start out as, you're free to respec, and you can try whatever you want. Now, if the question's about the tutorial experience that we have on the gunship leading into Broken Shore, currently we mainly focused just on damage dealing, because the point of that tutorial is to get returning players who might not have played the game in a while familiar enough with the basics of a spec to just go quest, to make sure they have the basic skills required to kill enemy mobs, loot them, turn in quests, and advance, with the understanding and trust that you'll pick up the rest along the way. And so that lends itself more towards DPS than it does to healing or tanking, which would be much more involved processes if we really wanted to teach those roles. And that teaching wouldn't really contribute to helping you quest if you're teaching that to heal a dungeon group. And just for honestly simplicity and clarity and removing extra choices before getting you into the game, we generally just give you one spec for the tutorial for a given class, simply because if you don't really know what those specs entail, it's not necessarily even a meaningful choice. Once you're in the game, if you decide that you're not a huge fan of the spec that you did the tutorial with, you're more than welcome to try others. The only exception there are DPS classes that have a melee and a range spec, so shaman, druid, hunter. In those cases, there's a huge difference between feral and balance, and if you used to play a feral druid years ago and you're coming back for Legion and you boost your druid with your free boost, and we drop you into balance form, that's a very foreign experience that's totally unlike what you may remember.
Yeah.
Whereas being Frost when you used to be Arcane, it's still close enough to the same ballpark.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the tutorial experience is really focused on that. I don't have any idea what I'm doing at all, whereas you can actually skip that right away as well.
Oh yeah,
if you go to the back of the boat.
Yes, exactly. Just talk to the NPC, and if you've done it before, don't need to stay there.
So, and then if you just want to say, hey, maybe I'll give Frost a try, maybe I'll give Unholy a try, you can actually just go ahead and do that. So cool. Question from Times Plays, I'm not sure, who asked, the Challenger's Path teleports were really helpful. Why did we not get them for maybe clearing a Mythic 10, for example?
They were really helpful. I think it's just different reward structures. The challenge mode system of Mists and Warlords wasn't a power reward system at all. It was all about cosmetics and prestige and achievements and convenience. And the Challenger's Path teleports were there to, they were originally added to give you some reward for getting a gold or 2 golds, even if you felt like getting all golds was going to be out of reach for you or your group. Because otherwise it was a system that, really just had the 1 mega reward at the very end of a long, long road and nothing incremental in between.
Right.
This way, at least, okay, well, I never got all of my achievements done. I never got all of my golds done, but I did Iron Docks gold before Warlords ended. At least I have this teleport permanently as a perk for that. Mythic Keystone's really designed from the ground up, on the other hand, to reward tons of power, and that's where the rewards are focused and will continue to be focused.
Cool. running very short on time. I'm going to try and get through a couple more questions. I'm actually really glad we got to this
Yeah.
one. Question here from Trafalol, who said, "Are you planning to do something about Elemental Shaman? The mono target's so underwhelming, it's quite hard to find a spot in Pugs."
So, yeah, okay. So, yes, obviously, elemental shaman concerns are definitely on our radar. It's something we've been discussing. A few broader issues. First off, yeah, elemental single target can use a little bit of a bump. I think we have one planned for 715.
Okay.
Some increased lava burst damage. But that said, one of the challenges we've run into with elemental shaman is, in terms of the overall feel of the spec, there are 3 separate moments that are currently all set up as supposedly your big payoff moment. There's Earthshock, unloading, your entire Maelstrom bar into a target. There's Lava Burst itself, that is your, big cooldown single target nuke that requires preparation in the form of Flame Shock on a target. And then with the artifact, you have Stormkeeper and the lightning bolts, chain lightnings that you fire at after that. And with 3 things competing with each other to be the big moment, often all of them end up feeling a little bit watered down. And then things like lightning bolt end up being really, really watered down and limp by comparison. So that's a trickier problem to solve and requires larger redesign. That's something that we're discussing but don't have any fixed plans on in the moment. I think the Stormkeeper change, we're really happy with how that played out in 7.1. It wasn't meant to be a huge numerical buff in terms of your sustained damage on Ursoc over the course of 5 minutes. But I think, as people have found, both in PvP and especially in dungeons, there's a tremendous amount of burst. If you, can do that Stormkeeper before a pull, unload triple chain lightning, instant cast, drop Earthquake, you're rocketing to the top of meters in a way that makes elemental shamans, I think, real stars in dungeon gameplay and some raid scenarios, some raid encounters. I think one other failing of our raid design, frankly, right now, is that we don't have enough diversity in damage profiles and different types of encounters, especially in Emerald Nightmare. There really isn't an AoE encounter anywhere in Emerald Nightmare. There isn't that encounter like, whether it's burst AoE like Imps on Manaroth or Iskar with the packs of ads that would come down. Like, if there were an Iskar type encounter in Emerald Nightmare, you'd see Elemental Shaman really shine and be incredibly valued on that type of fight, but we didn't. There isn't one of those, and that's on us. That's something where we as encounter designers need to make sure that we're creating a range of encounter types that are going to allow different strengths and weaknesses to shine, so that instead of it being, well, I'm good at dungeons but bad at raids, it's, well, I'm great in multi-target situations and less good in single-target situations, but those are present both in dungeons and in raids.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I think we are just about out of time. Excuse me. So this will probably have to be the last question here. This one comes from Podunk Monk, who's actually a similar question about Brewmasters, saying, "Any chance you'd be willing to discuss your thought on Brewmasters and their current state? To most of the community, they are almost an instant decline when trying to pug." So kind of a common thread between these two questions is part of the issue possibly with the class design itself,
community
but part of the issue is
it totally is. Like, it totally is. And so this is tough. I don't know that I have a really good or satisfying answer here. Because what I'm going to say isn't going to make it's not going to make you feel better when your experience is applying to groups and getting turned down because people are less familiar with your spec and they know that, well, okay, we'll just take a warrior or a paladin or a druid or someone else rather than taking a risk, quote unquote, on this spec that we haven't seen much of. Brewmasters are really good. Brewmasters are really, really, really strong right now. They just have a different feel to other tanks. I think some of it can be misleading when you look at some metrics on healing taken or healing required. Brewmasters smooth out incoming damage so much that even if they take a little bit more, even if they take a few more points of damage, they take it in a way that's so much more predictable and manageable that can be handled by things like steady hots, that ultimately their survival is incredibly high. It's very, very common. I've heard feedback from healers who say, Brewmaster monks are so frustrating to heal. It feels like I can never top them off. They're always just sitting at half health. And then I ask, well, are they dying? They're like, no, but it's so frustrating. I can't top them off.
Yeah.
But they're not dying. And ultimately that's what tanking is all about. They have great mobility, solid control, really good cooldowns, and they have the unique ability to survive things that no other tank could survive. I think Odin in Trial of Valor just recently, you compare a Brewmaster tank to almost any other spec, and his phase 3 spear ability, like there'll be a case where it's like one tank needs to use every cooldown they possibly have to survive, and it still hits them for 2.5 million.
Yeah.
Then the Brewmaster takes like 700k damage. and that's what Brewmasters can do. But again, I understand that there can be certainly something of a high skill cap to playing the spell, the spec correctly. And if you haven't seen many of them, there's this sense of uncertainty and unwillingness to take a risk. Everyone who's forming a group, this is the same reason people often decline players who are adequately geared to do a dungeon in favor of even higher geared players.
Right.
Because everyone just wants a smooth run.
Yeah.
Right? Psychologically, you just want certainty. If I'm taking an hour out of my time to make a pug to run Arcway 6 or whatever, and I want to get my keystone done, I want, not knowing these people, they're all strangers. All I know about them is their name, their spec, their item level, maybe their proving grounds or some achievement that they linked. It's only natural to want to form the group that's going to have the highest likelihood of success. Yeah. And I understand that, in that world, you don't want to take a gamble on something you're less familiar with. That said, you really should take a gamble on Brewmasters. And that's tough. So super unsatisfying answer. I know there isn't, the answer isn't, well, we're going to buff them even more. But
because then the people that know how to play them well are just going to be way overpowered.
Basically, it raises the question, right? Should we buff something to the point that they're brokenly good just to get the community to take a look at it? And I'd actually love to hear a broader discussion on this topic from the community at large. Even if you want to disagree, and your argument is Brewmasters actually are terrible. Okay, fine. Assume for the sake of argument, let's take a nameless spec, not your spec. Let's say there is a spec that every metric we have indicates is objectively stronger than their peers, but they're viewed as weak and they have a bad reputation and they're played less. What's the right path there? I think that's something that we discuss a lot and agonize over, because it's often perception is greater than reality. Right? I get it. Like, your spec can be fun, your spec can be powerful, but if no one wants to take you into a group, you can't play the content you want to play, and that's not fun. So we are always working on and thinking about solutions to it, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it is an interesting conundrum for sure.
It is.
All right. Well, that's we are well over time at this point. So thank you so much for being here and answering some questions with us here.
Thanks for all the great questions.
Yeah, we actually had a lot of really good questions. I wish we had more time to go through all of them, because there were a lot of really good questions that came in. But yeah, thank you so much for being here again. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah. Next one of these we are trying to get sometime in the first couple of weeks of December. Is kind of the area that we're looking at.
Yeah. In general, I'd love to do these like once a month. Yeah. In that general ballpark. Sometimes it'll be someone else. Can't always promise it'll always be me. But yeah, I think I love answering these questions and just getting information out there and keeping the dialogue going.
Yeah. And hopefully by then we can figure out why the stream keeps dropping. That would be great.
That would be amazing.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. And we will see you next time.
All right. Take care.